If you spent your childhood reading the room before you could even read a book, I need you to lean in. Maybe you spent your evenings monitoring the frequency of your parents' voices, listening for that specific sharp edge in the kitchen that signaled a storm was coming. Maybe you were the family therapist at age 7, the peacekeeper at 10, or the one making sure the bills were paid and the younger siblings were fed, while the adults in the room were emotionally or physically offline. If that sounds like your history, you probably carry a very specific, heavy exhaustion today. It is a bone-deep fatigue that sleep cannot touch. You are likely the responsible one in every group, the person who cannot relax at a party until you have scanned every face and confirmed that everyone else is comfortable. Society looks at you and calls you mature, a natural leader, or the rock of the family. But you know the truth, you don't feel like a leader. You feel like you have been an adult since you were 6 years old, and you are tired of holding up a sky that was never yours to carry. I am Silas, and today we are looking at the hardware of the parentified child. In the rare mind tribe, we don't use the language of pity. We don't see you as a victim of a lost childhood. We see you as a specialized intelligence. You didn't just grow up too fast. You were forced into early onset system auditing. You were drafted into a war of adult emotions before your brain had finished its basic wiring, and that process turned you into a master emotional strategist. In the laboratory of the self, we recognize that parentification isn't just a trauma, it is a forced upgrade. While other children were learning how to play, how to be messy, and how to exist without a care in the world, you were learning emotional mapping. You were the shadow CEO of a dysfunctional firm, tasked with managing complex human data that you didn't even have names for yet. This created a sentinel intelligence in you that is now decades ahead of the flock. You didn't just learn to caretake. You learned to predict conflict before it manifested in the physical world. You learn to navigate what we call wicked environments with surgical precision, because your survival depended on your ability to read the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. You are essentially running a high-resolution operating system in a world where most people are still using low-res, 8-bit emotional processing. This specialized intelligence is what we are going to unpack today, starting with the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. You aren't broken. You are optimized for a high-stress environment that you have now outgrown. Let's look at the hardware. This brings us to the first layer of your cognitive architecture, which is high-fidelity sensory gating. Because you lived in a home where an adult's mood could shift like a weather pattern, your brain developed a specialized form of high-fidelity radar. Most people walk into a room and see furniture and people. You walk into a room and see a data stream. Your mirror neurons, those brain cells responsible for empathy and social understanding, became highly specialized at detecting signal in a sea of noise. You can detect a micro-expression of annoyance or a hidden pocket of tension in a conversation from 50 feet away. This isn't a psychic vibe. It is a biological data processing feat. Your amygdala, the brain's radar system, is constantly scanning for threats, but not just physical ones. It is scanning for emotional instability in others because, in your childhood, an unstable adult was a dangerous environment. You have become a master of lateral thinking because you spent a lifetime solving problems that weren't yours to solve. You had to think 5 steps ahead of everyone else just to keep the peace. Building on that, we have to talk about the development of your prefrontal cortex. In a healthy childhood, the prefrontal cortex, the executive center of the brain, develops gradually through play and safe exploration. In a parentified child, this area is often forced into hyperdrive. You had to develop executive function skills long before they were age-appropriate. This results in what I call the strategist's paradox. You are incredibly efficient at managing crises, organizing chaos, and seeing the logical path through a disaster. However, because this part of your brain was forged in fire, it has a hard time turning off. You feel a constant pressure to be productive, to be the one with the plan, and to be the person who holds everything together. If there is no crisis to solve, your brain will often manufacture one or find a project to obsess over because the state of calm feels like an error message to your hardware. To your nervous system, calm feels like the silence before a strike. This leads us into a deeper understanding of your internal locus of identity. Most people derive their sense of self from their social group or their external achievements. But as a parentified child, your identity was likely fused with your utility. You learned very early that your value was tied to what you could do for others, how well you could soothe a parent, how quiet you could be, or how much of the domestic burden you could shoulder. This creates a cognitive glitch where you feel invisible unless you are being useful. You struggle to exist in a state of being because your entire OS is programmed for doing. When you aren't helping, fixing, or managing, you feel a crushing sense of worthlessness or guilt. This is what we call the hyperresponsibility virus. Because you were responsible for the system of the family as a child, your brain now thinks it is responsible for every system it encounters. If a friend is sad, your hardware tells you it's your fault. If a coworker fails, you feel like you should have caught the mistake. This is system fatigue. Your sentinel radar is redlining because it hasn't realized that the war is over. Furthermore, we need to address the intolerance for cognitive dissonance that often develops in the forged survivor. Because you grew up in an environment where you had to be the emotional truth teller or the secret keeper, you have a very low threshold for BS. You can see through manipulation and gaslighting instantly because you had to do it to survive. You are a truth detector in a world of static. This makes you an asset in high-stakes environments, but it can make social life exhausting. You find small talk physically painful because it feels like low-fidelity data that serves no strategic purpose. You crave depth and transparency because you spent your formative years navigating the murky shadows of adult dysfunction. You don't have social anxiety. You have a high-resolution filter that finds most social interactions to be a waste of bandwidth. But there is a maintenance tax for this level of intelligence. It's called the isolation of the sentinel. When you are the one who fixes everything, people start to treat you like an object rather than a human. They come to you for your output, your advice, and your stability, but they rarely ask what is happening behind your own eyes. You become the mirror void, a person who reflects everyone else's needs but has no reflection of their own. You have become so good at being the rock that everyone assumes you don't need a place to rest. This creates a profound sense of loneliness. You are surrounded by people who depend on you, yet you feel completely unseen. This is the result of your early training in self-erasure. You learned that to keep the peace, you had to minimize your own needs until they were invisible. Now we move into the tactical reorientation. You don't have to delete your strategy, you just have to reassign the mission. The skills you learned, the emotional mapping, the crisis management, the high-fidelity perception, are your superpowers. But they are currently being used to fuel a legacy virus of people-pleasing. Here is your user manual for reclaiming your sovereignty. First, you must audit the contract. Realize that the job you were given as a child, to be the emotional caretaker of adults, was an illegal contract. You were a minor, you did not sign it. You are allowed to resign from the position of family fixer at any time. You do not owe the world your exhaustion as a down payment for your existence. The next tactical move is the practice of sovereignty. When you feel that familiar surge of guilt because someone else is in a bad mood, I want you to pause and run a system check. Ask yourself, Is this my data or theirs? If it is theirs, you must practice strategic detachment. You must become the mirror void. When someone tries to project their instability onto you, give them back nothing but their own reflection. Do not fix. Do not soothe. Do not manage. Just observe. This will feel like a system failure at first. You will feel an intense urge to intervene. But every time you refrain from fixing someone else's problem, you are deleting a line of code from that childhood virus. You are teaching your nervous system that you are no longer the designated survivor. Finally, you must implement the play protocol. For a parentified brain, play is viewed as inefficient data processing. You likely feel guilty when you aren't being productive. You have to override this. You need to consciously schedule low-definition time. These are activities with no goal, no output, and no responsibility to anyone else. Whether it's wandering through a forest, building something just to take it apart, or staring at a wall with a pair of headphones on, you need to prove to your brain that you can exist without being useful. You are a sovereign mind, not a tool for others to use. You were a master strategist before you were a teenager. You have survived environments that would have crushed most people. Now, it is time to use that intelligence to build a life for yourself, not just to maintain the peace for everyone else. You have spent enough time as the shadow CEO of other people's lives. It is time to step into your own headquarters. If you were the little adult in your house, if you were the one who had to grow up before you were ready, I want you to drop a key emoji in the comments. It represents the key to your own autonomy. Let the other shadow CEOs in the pack know they can finally step down from the role. You aren't a servant, you are a sentinel. You aren't broken, you're just rare. Stay observant, stay rare, Sila's out.